So today we're going to talk about Power Automate, beginner to pro, and hold on. I spend most of my time, and this is really SharePoint and Power Automate. So I spend most of my time building Power Automate flows that work with SharePoint. I am a Microsoft MVP. I will tell you that I am not a PowerPoint MVP, so apologies in advance. I'm working on my PowerPoint skills. So I did put a little poll in here. Hold on. And let me see if I can get that to go. Is it going to load? So here are my questions. And, if you have the time and inclination to fill it out, I'm kind of curious about who's here and whether or not you build flows for yourself or other people. I have another question about experience level, beginner, intermediate, and expert. So the last time I did this presentation, it said beginner to pro, and there were people who had no Power Automate experience, and they asked me how to get there. So that's a whole different presentation. And it sounds like we definitely have some people here or who are in the expert level. So just kind of get a feel for everyone else's. And then how often do you use the new designer? And occasionally split or most of the time. Now, I'm not really expecting any most of the times, but so I'll give you a minute. We'll see if any, yes.
It looks like they don't have access to the form.
They don't have access. Oh no. Hold on. Thank you.
Jim's like, I have the power. I can fix this.
I can fix it. I can. Hold on. I think I can. One can respond. Okay, try it again and see if that works.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. So I've been working with SharePoint since 2008. I have been working with Power Apps and Power Automate primarily since as soon as I could ditch SharePoint Designer. That was a very exciting day when I was able to get rid of that. See some more coming in. I'm going to go with the tree map. So I work at Oak Ridge National Lab now. I've spent lots of time in the government. Go ahead, Janine. I see your hand up. Okay, so I have spent a bunch of time working at Oak Ridge National Lab. Been here the past couple of years. Before that, I worked in government, manufacturing, and in media. And for the most part, I've focused in on business process automation. So looking at who we have, 18% I build for myself, 18% for others, and then 63 for both. So primarily, I hopefully there's something in here for everyone, but definitely for the people who are building for themselves. There's a lot of things that you learn when you're building flows for other people that's super helpful. So experience levels, so mostly intermediate, beginner, and some experts. And lastly, the new designer. So we'll take a look at some of the things in the new designer. We are at a pretty nice split here for occasionally split and most of the time. So let's see. Get my Did you guys lose me? Hold on a second.
Nope, you're good.
You
You're
can still
there,
see
Bill.
my screen?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
I can't see your screen.
I don't see the screen either, just you.
Well, I see you. So
Oh, okay. You see me, but you're not seeing my screen. Okay,
Correct.
good enough. All right.
Gonna be one of those days, is it?
It is going to be one of those days. Okay. So there we go. So I'm at Oak Ridge National Lab. We are hiring. We are all over in science and technology. And if anyone is interested, we are looking for SharePoint people. So I'll just put that out there. So some of the reasons that I started doing this presentation on beginner to pro, again, it's back to those lessons that you learn when you're building flows for other people. And it's really getting together. There's three things that we're going to talk about and kind of areas to focus in on. One is maturity. As you build more Power Automate flows, you definitely have more maturity in them getting started as a baseline. And you want to do those faster and you do that with really making things reusable and having some good baseline best practices. And the other thing is support. So the more flows that you build, the more that you have. And you want to make sure that you are taking steps to reduce the number of times people are calling you to talk about those flows and ask you questions about them. You want to get those, make them as sustainable as possible for whoever you're building them for. And when you're building them for yourself, it's no big deal just to go in and make a change, to make an adjustment. But when you start building flows for other people, if one person calls you, that's fine. When you have customers over a couple of years calling you back, that can get to be a lot. So thinking about that now is definitely going to save you time down the road. So one of the first things we're going to look at is saving your flows. And let me flip over here to Power Automate. Okay. So I used to do this at the very end of this presentation, saving your flows. If you aren't already know or didn't know that you could save your flows, you can. And it's super easy to do. So let me open up Notepad here real quick. Oh, there's a bunch of stuff in Notepad. I should clean that thing out every once in a while. Hold on a second. Okay, sorry about that. So I'm just going to open up a flow that I have here. And we're going to talk more about what's in this flow in a few minutes, but as we talk through things today, I want you to be thinking about your flows. And in here, you have this option to copy your action. Now, this is the new designer, and we're going to kind of go back and forth between the new designer and the old designer. There's a couple of differences in copying your flows between the new designer and the old designer, but you can actually copy actions in the new designer now, which is something that we lost and a reason that I really hated the new designer. So you have copied in my clipboard here. So what this looks like in the new designer, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add a new step. Oh, add a new step. I'm going to go into my clipboard. And you can see my workflow is right in there and I can just add it over and over again. Now, let's say I have some logic. So some things that are really specific organizational logic are going to be like, maybe you have an action that's connecting to some SQL on-prem using a data gateway. Maybe you have an action that you're getting some custom attributes from Entra ID. So you want to save that. It's going to be unique to you, unique to your organization. One of the reasons I guess I feel like I need to explain some of the reasons you want to save things is because we have Copilot. And if you've been reading about Copilot and depending on where you are on using it, you may have some higher expectations from Copilot Power Automate. It's getting there, but there are still some things that it can't do for you. So when you have these things that you want to save and reuse in your flows, you can just take them, copy them into Notepad, copy them into Visual Studio Code. You can save them in SharePoint. You can save them in OneDrive. You can save them in GitHub. Where the real power of saving your Power Automate flows comes into play is when you have a team of people building Power Automate. And as they start to put together reusable components that you can go through and pick from and create a library for them, your flows start coming together much faster. They're much more mature because they've been built kind of thinking about reusability. And how do you do that, make that experience better? You also start to create an environment where people are building flows consistently. And so if you're out, or somebody else is working on one of your flows, it makes it much easier for them to come in and work on your flows. Again, because it's all kind of consistent. I have a flow, one of the first ones that I did this one, and it was a document library, and it was getting all the files in each folder and putting them into a zip. And I did that once. I kind of pieced together some stuff I found on the internet and I figured it out. And then I didn't save it. So when I went and I didn't think about reusability, and about 2-3 weeks later, I had another use case for that. And I went back and looked at it, and it was, helpful because I've done it once. However, had I taken the time to go ahead and kind of set that up in a more thoughtful way, it definitely would have helped me save time into the next flow. So let's see. So yeah, definitely you can save those, save your flows, save parts that are reusable, especially organization and institutional things. It's going to bring consistency, and thinking about some things that you might do on every flow. You are going to immediately start off at a higher level because you're going to have built-in logic to that. Don't just save your flows once. If you have parts that you're using and you add more functionality to it, go back and update, what you've saved. So that kind of takes me into scopes. And scopes are, again, these, the tips that I'm giving you today, we're going to go through them. It's not necessarily how to build a flow. It's just some individual tips that I've found to be really helpful. So I'm going to go in here and add a scope. And let's see. So I have a couple of actions now, and I put them together in this scope, which I can minimize and I can expand. So if you're working with a big flow, especially if you have different stages or different parts of your flow, putting them in a scope is going to make it much more manageable as far as navigating and moving around. So let me go ahead and save this. And I'm going to flip over to the new designer. So in the new designer, we have a couple of things. Initially when you started working with the new designer, you couldn't do large flows, and those are mostly what I work with. So I was so excited to have this map because you can kind of move around and jump in the new designer to the flow that you're looking for, the part of it. So the fact that you can do this with big flows, you can zoom in and out and kind of look at your whole flow. Super helpful. But one thing that you can't do, so hold on, let me go back to the center. So you have a little center field, center icon there. So one thing you can't do on this, okay, so hold on. The last time I did this, you could not copy a scope. That was like a week ago. So has anyone seen this? This is pretty new. You could copy just actions, but now it looks like you can copy entire scopes, and I am 100% here for this. This is fantastic news, and it's another big thing that I needed to have in order to switch to the new designer more. So let's see. So now I can paste an action, and I've added the whole one. That's super awesome. I did not expect to see that there, and I am very happy about that. So the new designer, they're rolling out new features all the time. And I know that with Microsoft Build, they had just announced a bunch of things, and including copy actions. So we got copy action, but now we have copy scopes. So that's awesome. So there's a couple of other things I'm going to show you about using scopes. Again, put your stages in this. So let's say you have a stage 1 where there's a first approval and all the steps that happen around that first approval. Maybe there's some processing actions and some final approval actions. Breaking those down in scopes is a great way to organize your flows so that you can jump around through them. So let's see. So the next thing I'm going to just kind of talk to you about is variables versus compose. And this is a mistake I see people make all the time, and not necessarily a mistake, but people use variables all the time and they don't realize that compose is there, or they use compose and then they realize they've made a mistake and have a bunch of rework to do because some of the limitations of the compose. So variables are going to hold any kind of information, and they can be repeated. Let's see. So hold on. I'm going to go in here, add an action, and we're going to initialize a variable. So in here, I'm going to give this a name. So when you use a variable, one thing that it uses this variable name, and you can reference it anywhere in your flow using that variable name. And that's a little different than a compose. A compose is going to use this name. So we're just going to do like a string name. Okay. And so anytime that I use this, I'm going to reference it this way. Oh, hold on. Was somebody talking? Okay. Yeah, just jump in if you have any questions. So you have a lot of different, types here, and you have to select a specific type. You have to define that here. So if you use a compose, you don't have to define it. You name it up here. And that's how you're going to reference it in the rest of your flow. And I'll just put that in there. So one other thing that I really like about, a variable you can update over and over and over again. It has to be defined at this highest level though. So I can't initialize a variable within a scope. I have to do it at the top level of my flow. And usually just for organization purposes, I try to put that at the very top of my flow. It does make it a little bit more easier to follow along. Okay, so now I'm going to let me expand this and drag my compose in there. So this is one thing that you can do with a scope and a variable or a compose that you can't do with a variable, and that's put them in a scope and then copy the entire action. That is a huge time saver. So let's imagine that you have a scope and you're passing multiple values to it, and this is a complex reusable scope that you're going to change over and over again. if you have a variable within a scope and you're referencing it, so let me go down here and in here, I'm going to reference, here's another thing that I like about the new designer. I'm going to hit slash and it's going to bring up my dynamic content. And I am going to get my variable string name. So I'm going to bring string name up here at the beginning. And now when I copy this whole scope, I'm going to get it with the compose, and I'll be able to take this whole thing, paste it into a new flow and start it. And if I don't do that and I reference some of these variables directly in here, I'm going to get an error on this compose because it's going to be looking for this variable, which is not in the scope. So variables, you do have to define them specifically. They can be updated repeatedly. They have to be defined at the root level, and they can't be included in the scope. But you can copy them after copy after initiating the variable. I'm not sure what I meant by that. So, and then in the compose. So compose, it will hold anything. It only has to be set once. It copies easily, but you can only set it once. And so that's just something to keep in mind. If you want to use that that value and change it later, you can't do that, but you can with a variable. So just kind of keeping those in mind. These can go into scopes. These can't go into scopes. Anyone have any questions about that? Okay. So now I want to show you, I want to talk next about using configure run after. And this is another thing in the new designer that I'm really kind of digging. So I'm going to go into my scope and into the settings. So configure run after is going to say, if this happens, these are the steps that I want you to take next. I'm actually going to run it on this one. So if my scope here works and is successful, move on to the next scope. But what I can do is say, if this is timed out, if it's skipped, or if it's failed, to take different actions. So you could do this in the classic designer. However, when you do it here, there's a visual indicator that lets you know exactly, and when you hover over, you can see exactly what the conditions are for that run after if you've set it. So in this case, I'm going to set this to failed. So if this scope and all the actions in it have failed, then it's not going to, it's going to come down here and look at this configure run after. And then it can run a new set of conditions. So here's an example of how you can use this for error handling. Okay, so I'm going to add an email, and in here, I'm going to say to, and then let's see, has failed. And then I can go down here and I can say, we're going to go into the settings. And I can say, run this set of actions if if the previous item was successful. So how can we use this for error handling? So what's happening in this flow now is we're setting a variable, there's a scope with a set of actions that's running. And if that fails and something doesn't work, it's going to send an email. And then I can decide what happens next after it sends that email. And so in this case, I am going to say if it's successful, but that's not really what I want. I'm going to say if it's successful or if it's skipped, maybe to go ahead and run. So that would mean it's going to go ahead and in that case, in that scenario, I'm running this scope and I'm running this scope. So I've got a set of consecutive actions, but I want some error handling to kind of let me know like something happened that was unexpected. So I'm going to save this. And it's telling me there we go. And so I'm going to flip off the new designer and take a look. And so if you're in the classic designer, what you're used to seeing is this. And basically, it's just a little information sign that says that you've run them, but it doesn't tell you what you've selected. So these visual indicators are super helpful. You can see on air. I have a friend that I've been working on this with recently that is colorblind. And so 0 help to him, except that these are all in order. So you can hover over it. You can kind of see it and read it still, but the red and green don't work for everybody. So
Hey, Pam,
yeah,
question for you.
yeah,
In Classic Designer, if
yes.
you have it set to say, like your send an email is set to has failed, in Classic Designer, if you copy and paste that action, it goes back to unsuccessful. It does not take the run after action with it. Does that work in New Designer, or is it the same and it changes back?
Yeah, no, it goes back to default. It
Okay.
goes back to default. Is that a feature or is that a bug? I think it probably
Right.
depends on who you ask. So let's see what happens though. I'm going to copy this entire action. I'm going to paste it. And yeah, I've lost all of that still. I gotta, yeah. So same thing.
If I wonder if you paste it before the other one with the run after condition, if it would move that condition upwards.
It did.
There you go.
That's interesting.
So then the run after condition is set in that position in the flow rather than on that specific action.
Yeah. So let's try this again.
Okay.
Hold on. Paste parallax. Yeah.
So, for example, if you were to duplicate that action, you won't get the run after condition, but if you deleted the action before it, would it just push that run after down to the next one, or would it erase it?
Oh, let's take a look. It erased it.
Gone.
Huh.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good information.
That was a great question. Okay. All right. So, it kind of in terms of structuring your flows and some things to think about for error handling, copying and pasting, and kind of having a good foundation for taking the things that we're going to look at next and using them going forward. I think those were the 3 main things. So now I want to look at, and I'm gonna delete some of this stuff that I have pulled in here. Okay. So one of the things, oh, it's funny. I deleted one of the things that I wanted to keep. There is not an undo button on the new designer. So you do have an undo button on classic, but not on new. You can always refresh if for some reason you have accidentally deleted something you wanted to keep. So that's okay.
And refresh just takes you back to the last save. Is that correct?
It does. It does. Like, yeah. So because I didn't save it. Had I saved it, then I might have had some options, but so I'm going to drag this out and go ahead and delete that scope. So this is one of the things that I use pretty often. And let me, oh, that's not compose. And it's not in there. So hold on one second. Let me see if I can get this. Okay, so this is a copied Power Automate action. And this is something that I actually use all the time when I'm building a flow that is going back to SharePoint, especially because it's going to be going back to somebody else. And oh, hold on. Don't want to copy an action. Hold on. Sure. So sometimes moving back and forth between the old designer and the new designer is it can be a little bit frustrating. So I'm going to go down here to I switched over to the classic designer, so I can go into my clipboard and I can copy and paste that action there. And we're going to take a look at it. And basically what this is it is a let me pull it up this way and see if I can zoom in a little so you guys can see it. So basically what I'm doing is I'm building a link back to this workflow instance. And then I take that link after I've built it and I write it back to the list. So here, if you haven't used the workflow expression, what it's going to do is it's going to get you, did I not get the whole thing? Okay. A, Control C. Okay. So using the workflow expression, we'll run this and take a look. You can get the environment name, you can get the workflow name, and then you can get the specific run instance. And a place where I might use this is, let's see, let me close that. And I'm going to go back to, so this is an example of a travel request. So let's say someone has put in a travel request and there's an approval. You might want to get that workflow instance and run it back, especially if you have a multiple level approval. You go ahead and manually test that. So it is 138 right now. Okay, and so what this did is this created a workflow instance. So imagine again that I have a multiple level workflow. I can take this URL and we'll go ahead and just do a test on it real quick. And it's going to take me directly to that flow that I just ran. And that way, any user that wants to go into this list, who's ever managing it, so I'm Pam, I want to check my approval. I'm going to be able to go in here, take a look at this flow and click on the link and see where it is in that approval process. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is trigger conditions. And oh, I do want to show you real quick. So let me go in here, edit. This one was kind of interesting in the new designer if you're using Copilot. I tried a lot of ways to ask Copilot to create a link back to the workflow instance run, and I didn't have any luck. And so one of the things you can do with Copilot is you can say, let's see, tell me what the compose action is doing. And it says it's generating a URL back to the Power Automate flow. So then I did, I took that exact same thing and said, add a compose that generates a URL. I asked it this 15 different ways. If this works right now, I'm going to be shocked. Okay, added this action. Let's take a look. Okay, that has not worked in the last 15 times I've done it, but I guess maybe it's getting smarter because I've asked it so many times. So it did literally just create that. Something to keep in mind with the prompts that you put out there in a Copilot, it might not work the first 15 times. Keep asking and keep working on that. I'm getting better by asking about asking because I go in and I say, tell me, what does this action do? It tells me what it does. And then I take that and I paste it in and say, hey, go ahead and do this. And so then it builds it. We're going to go ahead and just test it and make sure it actually works. That's crazy. Okay. There is no configure after. I'm going to save that. Test it again. Okay. And it did. It made me a flow or a URL. I'm going to come back here and look at it again. And it ran at 142. So yeah, keep plugging away with your Copilot. It's all about how you ask. And I did not ask it right the first 15 times. So let's go back here. I kind of lost track of time there. So at 143, so using send HTTP request to SharePoint, probably a lot of you guys, I think, are already doing this. So I have a note in there about the Microsoft Developer Program, and I do usually encourage people to go in there and create an instance. You used to be able to do this, and you can't do that now. So unless you have a kind of an eligible Visual Studio MSDN license. So but you want to go into your environment and kind of look at the API for website list. There's a lot of things in there that you can do that you can't do with an action. And this is actually something that Copilot has been pretty helpful with. So let's see. Create a send HTTP request to SharePoint action that will get the site description. Okay, hold on. Create an action that will get all of the lists from a SharePoint site. Get lists. So I have to think of something that's not on there. So I specified that I wanted to use a send an HTTP request. And I was thinking, oh, well, let me try it without specifying that and see what kind of results I'm getting because everything's been a little different today. So it will go ahead. So this got me the list. Hold on. Updated, add in an action. Let's see. That's why. Okay, so this updated my action. Let me put this back in here. And site name, get lists. Okay. So using Copilot when you're using a send an HTTP request to SharePoint, I have a library of actions that I use. We had a weird request one time to be able to turn search on and off, and Copilot was super great about that because I was able to go through and say, for this site, go ahead and create a send HTTP request to check the search status. So when you went into web, crawl actually shows up, search actually shows up at no crawl. So if it's no crawl equals true, there's no search on. And so it's kind of a really confusing thing. So that's a great use case for Copilot to be able to go in and ask it a question and have it find that information and build an action for you. Okay, emails. So sending emails, there's a couple of different strategies that we use, that I use in order to kind of minimize. This is probably the number one thing that I get contacted about after I've delivered a flow to somebody and they want to change the emails. So there's a couple of different strategies you can use. One is to kind of always have if you have an approval, you can build an email that is dynamic. So you can say, travel request status equals, and if it's approved or rejected, you can just kind of put that response summary in there from the flow. However, if it's just an email that's providing information at different stages, I find that these things, people want to change them a lot. So I'm going to go in here and create a new list. And let's see. Going to add multiple lines of text. And I'm going to change this to body. Add an item and say, thanks for submitting. And in here, just additional information. And okay. Thanks for submitting. Additional information here, and I'm going to save this. So my ID equals 1. Now when I go into a workflow, if I need to add an action and I'm going to send an email. This email address. So I'm going to put that in there, and in the subject Hold on a second. So in the subject of the email, normally I have to type something in here or I have to pick it dynamically. So I'm going to do add an action and I'm going to get an item. And I'm going to go to my demo list and pick the emails that I just added and set it to 1. And in here, I'm going to just hit /, which is going to insert dynamic content. I'm going to get the title and I'm going to do / insert dynamic content and do the body. And so now I have my email. Oh, that's there is no let's do custom value. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. He doesn't like that. Hold on. I'm going to just type in my Gmail account here real quick. Like there's a new line in there. Hold on. Okay, well.
When that happens to me, I just hit the little X on the send to.
The little X on the send to and type it in again.
And then you have to click enter custom value.
Feel like I did that, but let's see. Hopefully that works.
Oh.
Okay. So
yeah, that one's frustrating.
Huh?
That one's frustrating.
Yeah. So let's see. We'll try it one more time. So basically, while I can't actually show you this, 2 is required. Yeah. What I'm doing is I'm pulling the information directly from the list. And some places where this has a lot of value, we have end of month and end of quarter and end of fiscal year notices that change. So I'm working with accounting and procurement, and they want to use this as a way to send out additional information when someone puts it in, like, hey, you've put this in, this isn't going to hit, any requests after this date aren't going to be processed until next fiscal year or next fiscal quarter or the end of month or, whatever is going on. And it's not, of course, just accounting. Anybody who has some kind of process, sometimes there's questions about their process, like, hey, I've put this in. How long does it take? So they can just go into the thanks for submitting and start putting in like any frequently asked questions, any additional information, and they don't have to contact me. And maybe they do, and maybe they go on a backlog and then, we, make changes or updates based on that feedback. But them being able to go in and change these on the fly as they want to is incredibly helpful. And you can stack that with information directly from the SharePoint list. So let's see. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about was just looking at data operations. This is another thing that I do feel like people don't spend enough time getting familiar with when they first get into Power Automate, because you kind of have a flow, you're creating, you're sending an email, you're doing simple things. And you want to get in there and definitely take a look at these data operations. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Seymour. So we talked about Compose. Another thing that I use all the time in a scope is creating an email that is a summary email. And so I do that using create an HTML table. So I'll get all the items in a SharePoint list and put them in an HTML table, and I can format it out. I can use a filter array to filter that list down that I'm getting from SharePoint. So I have specific items. So let's say I want to send an email that only shows, that goes to each assigned to person with the items that are assigned to them. That's another great example of where I build something like that at once. And I use compose actions to kind of pass values into that. And I save that whole section in a scope and I pull it off. So when I go to work with somebody else and they want a summary email, it's really no problem because I'm going to take that flow. I'm going to take that logic and I'm either going to take a flow itself and just copy it and reuse it, or I'm just going to take that save scope and put it into a flow and be able to send that out. And those things start saving you so much time. You start adding, and people are giving you requirements for your flows. Those are things that are just defaults because you already have them. They're already available and you can turn them around quickly. So select is something you would use with the HTML table for sure. But it's something else that I also use a lot of times when I'm trying to pull information out of an array. In the parse JSON, if you struggle with using arrays and understanding what that information is and how to look at it and how to get those values, definitely parse JSON is something that's really helpful to look at. So I'm going to flip back over to questions. I apologize for some of the technical issues I had. There were a couple things that threw me off today, but I think that we got through it, and I hope that there was something in there that was helpful.